In the summer of 2004, Hannah and Jason had been hiking long-distance trails for years. Seasoned backpackers, they sought out trails that offered a mix of beauty, isolation, and challenge. When they decided to tackle the old immigrant road near Dead Man's Pass in northeastern Oregon, it seemed like the perfect escape. The trail, once used by pioneers traveling the Oregon Trail in the mid-1800s, was famous for its rugged terrain and ghostly tales, but they weren't superstitious. "We'll be fine," Jason had said as they set out from their campsite early that morning. "Just an old pioneer route. What's the worst that could happen?" The sun was high overhead, casting sharp shadows over the sagebrush-dotted landscape. The heat was oppressive, but the wind that occasionally swept down from the mountains brought some relief. As the hours passed, they found themselves deeper into the wilderness. The trail wound through a mixture of forest and open plains, with ancient wagon ruts still visible in the dirt, a reminder of those who had traveled it before them. "Dead Man's Pass," Hannah said, reading from a guidebook during one of their breaks. "Named for the immigrants who didn't survive the trek. Looks like a lot of people got stuck in bad weather, or they were attacked by animals. Some of the diaries say they ran out of food, too. I guess it was pretty brutal out here." Jason smirked. "So it's got a spooky name. I'm sure we'll survive." By late afternoon, the landscape had shifted. The trees began to thin, giving way to a rolling, barren landscape of dried grasses and stunted vegetation. The air felt different, thicker, almost oppressive. There was a stillness in the wind, a weight that settled over them as they trudged along the path. "Feels weird here, doesn't it?" Hannah said, wiping sweat from her brow. Jason nodded, though he didn't want to admit it. "Just your imagination. We're in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no people. It's bound to feel a little eerie." They pushed on, but the unsettling feeling only grew as the shadows lengthened and the light began to fade. The sun dipped behind a ridge, casting the landscape in an orange glow, and that's when they first saw them. Up ahead, barely visible in the fading light, were two figures. They moved slowly, hunched and shuffling, as if every step was a struggle. Hannah squinted, trying to make out more details. "Hikers," she guessed. "But they don't have any gear." As they drew closer, the strange figures came into sharper focus. The two were dressed in ragged, threadbare clothing, clothes that looked like they'd been worn for months, if not years. Their faces were gaunt, skin pale, and stretched tight over their bones. One was a woman, her hair matted and tangled, her eyes sunken and hollow. The other was a man, limping along beside her, clutching his arm, which was wrapped in a filthy piece of cloth. "Hey!" Jason called out, waving an arm. "Do you need help?" The figures stopped and turned slowly to face them. Their eyes, dark, tired, and filled with something like terror, locked onto Jason and Hannah. The woman spoke first, her voice weak and cracked, like she hadn't used it in days. "Help," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "Please, we've been walking for so long." Hannah and Jason exchanged a glance. Something wasn't right. These people looked like they hadn't seen civilization in weeks. Maybe they'd gotten lost? But who hikes out here without food or supplies? "Where did you come from?" Jason asked, stepping forward cautiously. "There's no town for miles." The man spoke this time, his words slow and labored. "We left Independence months ago. We're trying to reach Oregon City, but we've lost the others. We need food." "Independence? Oregon City?" Hannah's stomach twisted with unease. Independence was hundreds of miles away, one of the starting points of the Oregon Trail. But no one had traveled the trail like that in over a century. "Wait, what year do you think it is?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. The woman's eyes flickered with confusion. "It's 1843, she whispered. Why do you ask?" Jason laughed nervously, but the sound was strained. "Okay, this has to be some kind of joke, right?" "There's no way." "They're serious," Hannah interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. There was no sign of modern life on these people. Their clothes, their language, their desperation, it was too real. They must be reenactors or something, Jason said, though he didn't sound convinced. Hannah shook her head. No. Look at them, Jason. They're not pretending. Look at their eyes. The man and woman stared at them with a mixture of desperation and hope, but behind that, there was something darker, something broken. These weren't actors. These were people who had been through hell. We lost the others, the woman repeated. The children, the men, we couldn't find water. The animals, they're gone. We haven't eaten in days. Please, help us. The weight of her words pressed down on them. Hannah's heart raced. It didn't make sense, none of this did, but she couldn't ignore the pain in their voices. We have some food, she said, fumbling with her pack. She pulled out a granola bar and a water bottle, offering them to the woman. The woman stared at the bar like she didn't recognize it. Slowly, hesitantly, she took it and bit into it, her lips trembling as the taste hit her tongue. The man, too, took the water, sipping it as though each drop was a lifeline. Jason stepped back, rubbing his temples. This isn't possible. There's no way these people are from 1843. How could they be here? Hannah didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. All she knew was that these people were real. And they were suffering. Where are the others? She asked gently. Your group, where did they go? The man's face twisted with grief. We lost them. Some just disappeared. Others, we buried them along the trail. The children, we couldn't. The woman let out a small, choked sob, covering her mouth with her filthy hand. We should have turned back. But it was too late. Too late. Jason's eyes scanned the horizon nervously. We need to get out of here, Hannah. This isn't right. But before they could move, the woman suddenly gasped, her eyes wide with fear. They're coming, she whispered. They always come when it gets dark. What? Who's coming? Jason asked, panic rising in his voice. The man's hands shook as he gripped his makeshift bandage. The shadows. They follow us, they take us, one by one. Suddenly, the temperature seemed to drop, the warmth of the day dissipating as the last slivers of sunlight vanished behind the hills. The wind picked up, howling through the dry brush. The air grew thick, heavy with an oppressive sense of dread. Jason, Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw them. Dark shapes, barely visible against the fading light, moving in the distance. At first, she thought they were animals, wolves, maybe, but then she realized they were too tall. Too upright. They moved silently, closing in on them from all sides, their forms twisting and shifting like smoke. We have to go, Jason said, grabbing Hannah's arm. Now. The woman collapsed to her knees, sobbing. They're here. They're here. Jason pulled Hannah, dragging her away from the couple, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the figures. The dark shapes advanced, closing the distance between them and the lost travelers. The couple didn't move, didn't try to run. It was as if they had accepted their fate. We can't leave them, Hannah cried, but Jason was already pulling her down the trail, his grip tight and desperate. The shadows swarmed over the man and woman, their twisted forms wrapping around them like vines. And then, in an instant, they were gone. The couple, the shadows, everything vanished, swallowed by the night. Hannah and Jason ran. They didn't stop, didn't look back, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they fled down the trail. The darkness pressed in on them, the weight of the lost souls following them every step of the way. By the time they reached their car, parked at a trailhead miles away, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. They collapsed into the front seats, hearts pounding, skin clammy with sweat and fear. We just saw, Hannah couldn't finish the sentence. Jason stared straight ahead, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. We're never talking about this again. Ever. And as they drove away, the wind whispered through the desert, carrying with it the faint cries of the lost ones of Dead Man's Pass, forever wandering, forever waiting.